In this demonstration, we'll take a look at how to perform credential attacks with Mimikatz, including a pass the hash attack. Let's start by getting into a Meterpreter session on our victim system. So the first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to type in MSF console to load Metasploit. Once Metasploit loads, then I'm going to choose an exploit that I've used to gain access to a system already. So I'm going to use the exploit for Windows against the SMB service, and it's the MS17_010_eternal blue exploit. Now notice that it configures my payload there. It says that no payload has been configured, so it's going to default to Windows x64 Meterpreter reverse TCP. Now the reason why I mention that is you do want to make sure that the payload that's selected is in a 64-bit version versus the x86 version. And in this case, it is the 64-bit version of Meterpreter. So it means when I exploit the system, it's going to put me in a Meterpreter session, which is a great tool to use for post-exploitation, including performing password or credential attacks. Once I've gone and selected the exploit, now I want to go and set my options. So I'm going to go and set my rhost value to the victim's IP address. In this case, it's a Windows client machine, which runs at 10.0.0.10. Now that I've got all that set, I'm going to exploit the system. If it's successful, it'll show a win at the bottom of the screen. And there we go. So it was successful. Notice that my prompt has changed. I'm in a Meterpreter prompt. And at this point, I could use any of my Meterpreter commands. But what we want to do in this example is we want to focus on using Mimikatz to perform credential attacks. So I'm going to use the load command to load the Mimikatz module. Now, one thing I want to stress here is that the commands have changed, and they even give me a little yellow explanation point there, and they say, hey, this Mimikatz extension has been replaced by Kiwi. So really the command I should have used was load Kiwi, but most people know this as the Mimikatz module, so that's why I wanted to use it, knowing that it would still work. So it says at the bottom of that output that it was successful in loading the Mimikatz module or the Kiwi module. And at this point, there's a number of commands that we can use. And if you want to see a list of the commands, you can use the question mark. So just to highlight a few examples of commands, if I want to take a look at any credentials, so Mimikatz is a module that we can use to extract passwords from memory of the victim system. So the creds_MSV will extract out the NTLM hashes from memory. So any user accounts that have authenticated on that system with the credentials still sitting in memory, it'll go and show those credentials to me. The other thing is that there's a creds_Kerberos, which will retrieve any Kerberos credentials and display those. Again, that's from memory. But we also have a command here to do a SAM dump. So if I want to retrieve all the password hashes from the SAM database of that system, I can use the LSA_dump_SAM command. And there's other commands here. You can do a password change on an account if you wanted to. I can get a list of Wi-Fi networks that the system is configured to connect to. So all kinds of different things that I can do here. So just to kind of show you a few examples, the first thing that we're going to use is we're going to use the creds_MSV, which will show any of the password hashes that exist in memory. So this client machine, somebody has logged on, and they logged on as the administrator, and there's our NTLM hash, which is awesome. So what you're doing at this point is you're kind of making a note of, okay, we have a username called administrator. The domain in this case is just a local workstation logon, so it's the name of the workstation, Win7a, and NTLM would grab the password hash. So you kind of start collecting that information. Now what's really cool is if you use the creds_Kerberos command, it'll actually show that password in plain text, not just the password hash. So now I'm collecting information about, usernames and passwords that are still stored in memory on this target system. So I can see there's a username called administrator on Win7A with a password, a capital P, a $$ W0RD, which is awesome. Now, the other thing that we can do as well is we can dump the entire SAM database. So I can do an LSA underscore dump underscore SAM. And what happens here, if I scroll up in my output, is we can see all the user accounts and their password hashes. So again, what you'll do is you'll collect this information. So we already know the plain text password for the administrator account. So I don't think there's a lot of value in grabbing that password hash, although you still may want to grab the password hash. But notice that we do see other users on the system. So there's a user account user1, and we have the password hash for that user account. We have user2, user3, and notice that the password hashes are different. So there are different passwords used on these accounts. So what you could do is you could collect that information. Now, also what you can do with Mimikatz is you can fire off custom commands. So there's a whole bunch of different commands that you can fire off. And with the Kiwi extension here now, to fire off a custom command with Mimikatz, it's Kiwi underscore command, and this was in the help there. And then in single quotes, you plug in the custom command. This will take a little bit of getting used to. The commands are in two parts. So the first part is the category of commands. So this is the secure LSA, and then we do : and you specify the action on what you want to do in the secure LSA category. And the action, there's an action called pass the hash. So I do : PTH space, and then you specify any parameters that it would need. So for instance, I can do the user that I want to authenticate in, or as, is user6. The domain, in this case, it's just the Win7A system. And then we can do an NTLM : and what we can do here is we can pass in the password hash of that user6. So I'm just going to copy that here. So I copy selection. I'm just going to paste it in with my command there. And then what you could also do is you could specify, not only do you want to authenticate to the system as user6 using, instead of trying to crack the password, I can just pass in the hash value is kind of the point here. But the other thing you can do as well is you can go and specify that you want to run a command. So I could do a /run, and I could do cmd.exe. Hit enter, and it comes up and gives me feedback here. It says, okay, you've authenticated as user6 on the Win7A system, and you're running the program cmd.exe, and they show the process ID here as well. So the point is, the pass the hash feature allows you to authenticate to a system without trying to figure out what the plain text password is. So you could use a password cracking tool and you could crack the password hash, but sometimes that could take quite a bit of time. So the idea here is that Mimikatz gives us the capability to authenticate to the system using the password hash if you use that /NTLM switch. So in this video, you saw how to perform credential attacks or password attacks using Mimikatz.